Aloha and welcome to the Savvy Luminary, an astrology podcast for entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Leslie Tagorda, a brand astrologer, designer, and spiritual business owner who has helped hundreds of businesses and nonprofits go from stuck to unstoppable. I am here to inspire you to make confident and focused moves that shine the light on your business through astrological insight, brand strategy, and interviews with other spiritual business leaders. I believe you are here to share your magic and shine brightly like the luminary you are meant to be. Okay, let's dig into this week's episode. Hello, Leslie Tagorda, your brand astrologer and designer, here today to talk about an entire episode on Mercury Retrograde. All right, so today's episode, I really want to leave you feeling empowered. You honestly do not have to freak the F out because Mercury Retrograde is coming. Right? I want you to know that Mercury retrograde is an amazing time in our lives. It's time to clean up parts of our life and our business where we just want to get a clean slate. And we're going to be talking about why everybody knows about Mercury retrograde nowadays, because it's a very powerful time. All right. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about what it is. I'm going to talk about the entire schedule of it coming up. It happens 3 times a year. We're going to talk about how you can use this time to recalibrate your business and not freak the F out, right? So what to do and what not to do during a Mercury retrograde. And then I'm going to give you a house by house retrograde focus so you can get some really personalized information on how to use this Mercury retrograde to your benefit. Then we're going to go through an action plan, the things that I want you to do at this time in your business based on the house by house focus, right? And so this is going to really, all of this information is going to really empower you. Now, because there's a lot of information in today's episode, there will be notes in the savvyluminary.com. So just look up the episode for Mercury retrograde and it'll have all of the important notes that you need. And of course, on Instagram at New Moon Creative Co. I'll have more information there and in our free group that I would love to invite you in, the Savvy Luminary. It's on Facebook and it's free to join. So please join our safe community for businesses that love to use astrology. Oh, and then I forgot, we'll also be covering the astrological weather for the week of February 16th through February 22nd. While of course, Mercury retrograde is going to be the biggest astrological cycle happening this coming week, there are a couple of other things that I'd like to bring into your attention. All right, so let's get started. Right? So have you noticed that over the past few years, Mercury retrograde has really come into the fore, right? You read it about it in the news and all of your favorite blogs, and it just seems like everybody is talking about Mercury retrograde. And some astrologers, will talk about the sky is falling, but hopefully you know me a little bit by now. I am such a silver lining person that I love to think about the gifts that all of the disruptions are actually bringing to us, where we need to really focus in on our lives and give us more space, right? Now, I believe that Mercury retrogrades have really come into our collective consciousness because it is so needed, right? We are in a stage, in a culture of information overload. And Mercury is our kind of like our transmission guide, the way that we receive information, the way that we export information, the input, the output of all of this information coming at us, all of this information that we're spewing out so that we can be seen, right? It's really too much. So Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year, and it just allows us to give ourselves space to clear the slate so that we can reprioritize and realign the things that are important to us, right? So that's why I believe that Mercury retrograde is in our collective consciousness now, because we all need this reset. Okay. If you go into the show notes, you will also see I placed the chart of when Mercury steps on the brakes to go backwards. So, in my free Facebook group, the Savvy Luminary, one of the members, Lindsay Bryan Podvin, asked, how do we use Mercury retrograde in the way that you do as a way to refresh and reframe instead of the way which I have is, quote, I won't say that because I don't want this to be an expletive. The sky is falling, right? So she asks a really great question. And I think that when we can prepare ourselves, when we can really know that Mercury retrograde wants to be on our side, and when we can know and plan for the things that could go wrong, when we give ourselves the space, we can use this time to retreat and relax rather than going against the grain and like sitting in traffic, getting all of these delays, right? So let's just start off with what is a Mercury retrograde. For those of you that don't know, or those of you who want a little bit of refresher, a Mercury retrograde happens when, from our perspective on the Earth, the planet Mercury actually appears to be going backwards. Right? This happens 3 times a year from our perspective on Earth because Mercury zips around the sun much quicker than we do. The Mercury year, the time that it takes to go around the sun, happens in about 88 Earth days. So from our spot here, it's going to look like Mercury often looks like it's moving faster or slower or just coming to a complete stop and going backwards, right? So the relationship between us here on Earth and what Mercury looks like in the sky is constantly in flux. And actually, when Mercury goes retrograde, Mercury is one of our personal planets. And when Mercury goes retrograde, it's actually at its closest point to us here on Earth. Okay, so I said earlier that Mercury is one of the personal planets. The other personal planets are Venus and Mars. And we call them personal planets because they're actually really close to the Earth. And those energies, we feel them on a personal level. Okay, Mercury is the ruler of both Gemini and Virgo. So, where Gemini wants to connect and it wants to grab as much information as possible, like Gemini wants to know everything about everything, Virgo wants to embody all that information and make it more organized and efficient, right? So Gemini, the air sign, and Virgo, the earth sign, right? So generally when Mercury is going forward, the way that we process information is it goes through our mind first. It goes through Gemini. Gemini is kind of like the first evolution of processing information. And once we can like figure things out in our head, then the Virgo kicks in and we start to embody and act upon that information. But for those of us who are born during a Mercury retrograde, right, there's a lot of us that are, I wasn't born during a Mercury retrograde. I was actually born right before a Mercury retrograde. So when Mercury is really going slowly. So my thought processes sometimes are not as quick as my mouth wants to move. But those of us who are born under a Mercury retrograde, they need to actually process the information in their body first. It needs to make sense in their body before their minds can actually like say, oh yeah, I get it, right? But because Mercury moves really quickly, Mercury transits are very fast, right? So the transits, what that means is when Mercury is going around our natal planets and it's activating certain planets. So our thought processes, kind of like our mood, are mercurial. They change on a day to day. So that's why sometimes you feel like, oh yeah, I got this. I can learn things really quickly. And sometimes depending on transit, Mercury is kind of cloudy and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't remember a thing, right? So unlike the moon, which also moves very fast, the moon is about our emotions. Mercury is about our thought processes, how we process information. And like in mythology, Mercury is the messenger to our soul, right? Mercury, as the messenger, is never far away from our consciousness represented by the sun, right? So Mercury will never be more than one sign away from your natal sun. right? And so, if you want to dig in more about Mercury and Mercury retrogrades, you can even look up online for a Mercury cycle calculator, and it'll actually give you the place in its cycle, in its retrograde cycle, where Mercury was at the time you were born. So, similar to the moon, if you did a moon phase calculator to find out what phase of the moon you were born on, you can do this also for Mercury. It's a little bit deeper than what we're going to go into here today, but if you have questions, of course, I'm here. Pop a question on the Savvy Luminary or on my Instagram, or email me through my website, thesavvyluminary.com. That's it in a nutshell about what Mercury retrograde is. So let's go into the schedule of this Mercury retrograde that is going to be happening starting on February 16th. So again, the entire schedule, I have it in the show notes because Mercury retrograde happens in several different stages. Right now, I'm actually recording this on February 12th, so a little bit before the Mercury station, but we are currently in the shadow zone because Mercury, before it goes backwards, just like if you're in a car, right, before you can go into reverse, if you're moving forward, you have to come to a complete stop before you go backwards, right? Just plain physics. So on February 16th, Mercury stations to go backwards. So all this means is that Mercury, from our perspective here on Earth, looks like it stepped on the brakes and it came to a complete stop. This is the day on February 16th that we're going to feel the effects of Mercury retrograde the most. Mercury will be stopping in Pisces at 12 degrees on February 16th. Okay. And what this means is that that day, please allow for a lot of padding in your commute to work that day, in your short distance travels. Put in a lot of time for any communications. If you're expecting a message that day or an email that day, expect there to be a little bit of delays. And when we know that this is the cosmic energy collectively for all of us, we don't have to stress out because we just know we need to add a little bit more time. If you happen to be traveling long distance, you should be okay, although there are tendencies for bags to get lost, flights to be a little bit delayed, poor airlines, maybe computer systems to go down. So a good idea, back up all your tech before then. I know the last Mercury retrograde happened. I was traveling to Hawaii and the fire system of our hotel broke down and the hotel flooded. Very typical Mercury retrograde kind of problem, right? So earlier that I mentioned that right now, as I'm recording this on February 12th, Mercury is actually in the shadow zone. So what the shadow zone is that once Mercury stops to go retrograde, it's going to backtrack, right? And so Mercury entered the shadow zone on February 2nd at Aquarius 28 degrees. And so what that means is that when Mercury starts to go backwards on the 16th, it's going to trace its steps back to Aquarius 28 degrees to where it was on February 2nd, right? So right now, as I'm recording this in the shadow zone, this is a time where Mercury is slowly coming to a stop. So it's not traveling as fast as it could be. So our thought processes need a little bit of extra time. We're not as quick-witted as we normally are, right? So February 16th, this is the big day. Mark it on your calendar. Leave a lot of space for yourself to get things done. Now, the next big day that I want to point out in the Mercury retrograde schedule is on February 25th. February 25th will be the midway point of Mercury going backwards. And this is when Mercury meets the sun. So in astrology, we call it the sun conjunct Mercury. For more technical astrologers, this is called the combust point. And this is at 6 degrees Pisces. This is midway. Why we want to take into effect this midway point is that the time from February 16th to February 25th, the beginning of the Mercury retrograde. I'm going to talk about this later on, but we actually do certain things at the first half of a Mercury retrograde. Okay. I'll talk more in detail on the rest later in this episode of the things to do at that first halfway point. Then after Mercury meets the sun on February 25th, Mercury will then continue going backwards, but now it's at the halfway point. It's going to go back into Aquarius on March 4th, and then it's going to station direct on March 9th. Station direct is Mercury's going backwards. It has to step on the brakes before it starts going forward again. So at all intents and purposes, Mercury retrograde is done on March 9th. Hooray! Right? There's all this information that we're going to be gathering during this time that's really going to help us move our business forward. Okay. So on March 9th, we're still going to be in the shadow period until March 29th, when Mercury finally leaves the shadow zone of Pisces 12 degrees, right? So Pisces 12 degrees is where it stopped on February 16th. It goes backwards, it goes forward again, but then it has to catch up all of that time. So after March 29th, Mercury will be moving quickly across the sky again. This is going to be a great time to really implement all the learnings that we had during the retrograde. Okay, so for your own chart, I want you to look at the 14 degrees in which Mercury is going to be tracing back and forth. And that 14 degrees is between Aquarius 28 degrees and Pisces 12 degrees. This is the area in your life and your business that's going to be needing re-examining, and I'm calling it the Marie Kondoing, right? Does it spark joy? Because Mercury is going to be transiting two signs, both Pisces and Aquarius. Let's talk a little bit about that, because Mercury in Pisces is contrary. It's an opposite, because Pisces is at the polar opposite of its home base of Virgo, right? Mercury, some people say that Mercury is in its detrimental place in Pisces, meaning that it's not at home. But for me, honestly, I have a Mercury in Pisces, and you find a lot of musicians, a lot of artists, a lot of like creatives having their Mercury in Pisces, because when you have Mercury in Pisces, a mutable water sign, it's very sensitive, and it deals with communicating the subconscious. It also communicates places of not necessarily escapism, but places of great imagination, of communicates places of myth, right? And so with Mercury in Pisces, for all of us, it's a time to access our deeper selves, access the things that we want to process through art, through music, through meditation, right? It's a way for us to access our inner knowing and access our creative juices, our communication juices through creativity, right? So all the things that you want to do right now is, make art, right? Put that vision board together. Really, this is a thing for Mercury during Pisces, right? And then towards the end, Mercury is going to move back into Aquarius. Aquarius loves to problem solve. It loves its data. It loves its statistics as a fixed air sign, right? It wants to problem solve. It wants to understand its self-worth through intellect, through ideas, through innovation. It wants to understand through freedom and through communication, right? So when we're blending these two, the Pisces and Aquarius during this Mercury retrograde, I want us to all get the feel that this is no ordinary Mercury, right? This season of Mercury is asking us to retreat, to relax, to create, and to use our imagination and our spiritual side to access the deeper parts of us that want to come through. Okay, and during this Mercury retrograde, Mercury is going to be dancing with the planet of Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces. So even more so, we need to wade through ideas of kind of like disillusionment. The opposite side of disillusionment to me is imagination, right? So sometimes because they can both have this kind of foggy feel to them, I want you to really step into that and sit with it for a while till you get clarity, right? You're going to be hearing me say retreat, restore, and relax. And now I know that this is an entrepreneur's podcast, and most entrepreneurs are like, I don't have time for retreating and restoration and relaxing. I'm here to tell you that those things are as equally as important as being productive. Because if we're not coming from a place of complete relaxation and restoration, oftentimes we're going to just have to backtrack, right? Mercury retrograde is going to be dancing with Neptune. It also has, at the time it goes retrograde, Mars and Uranus are going to be in a very harmonious aspect in Earth signs. So this is going to really give us the assertive motivation, not an aggressive motivation, but just like a very inspired motivation to embody all of the learnings that Mercury retrograde has for us, right? Not just in our mind, just not thinking about it, but through practical, inspired action oriented progress. So on to the next section. So how can we all use this time to recalibrate and not freak the F out, right? Here's where we're going to talk about what to do and what not to do during a Mercury retrograde. So you probably already know what not to do, right? It is not a time to sign contracts of any kind, any leases, any new contracts for big projects, right? It's not a time to launch new projects or products. It's not a time to be rushed. It's not a time to like force things to happen, or even like a time to like start new businesses or anything like that, right? Now, if you have like a big project that you've been looking at and the contracts have been kind of going back and forth through negotiations, you can proceed with caution and sign those things. That is okay, because in all intents and purposes that project had started beforehand. It's not a new project. But be wary, double check things, make sure that there are no mistakes, make sure that there's no missing information, make sure that there are no misunderstandings. Try to get as clear as possible, because during Mercury retrograde, oftentimes when we're taking new action, what we can expect are mistakes, misunderstandings, missing information, right? And so oftentimes these mistakes and misunderstandings and misinformation, they create delays for us, right? They create misfirings. And we can, beat ourselves up for it. We can like talk badly and say like, oh, how silly were we? Or, just like get ourselves up in a tizzy. But if we can look at these delays as the gifts that they are, right? Because oftentimes the delay, even though in the midst of the delay, we are so frustrated, we just want to get over it. But maybe a week later, you look back on the delay and there was a gift in the delay. You found out that missing information, or your schedule got interrupted so that you were at a more opportune place at a certain time, right? So oftentimes these places of delays and frustration, when we look at them as the gifts that they are, ask yourself, right? What wants some TLC in your life right now? Because there is something, a sign there waiting for you when you're trying to rush through things, right? So what do you want to do during this time? I'm going to go through retrograde through the houses to give you specific insight, but for you in general, for all of us in general, the things that we want to do with this time is we want to slow down. We want to avoid being overloaded, right? We want to reorganize and reprioritize. At the very beginning of this episode, I was talking about this is a chance for us to clean the slate, right? When we reprioritize, we are asking ourselves, hey, are the goals that we put in front of us really the goals that we want right now? Or have we shifted? Do we need to realign? Do we need to reorganize our lives and our businesses to match that new shift? I think that's beautiful, right? So when we understand what we need to reorganize and reprioritize, then of course it's a perfect time to restart, relaunch, and anything, right? Basically add a re to it, and it's a perfect time for Mercury retrograde. Okay, now to get into some specifics, right? When you look at your own natal chart, you can look again at where Mercury is transiting, where it's going retrograde through the different houses in your chart. And Mercury may transit more than one house for you. Like for me, it's going to be transiting the 10th house and the ninth house. So I'm going to combine some of the themes of the energies that I'm going to share with you house by house. What to look for during this Mercury retrograde, right? So what you want to do for each of these houses is this is going to give you insight as to where you need to review, right? Where you need to reassess what you've been doing, and where you also need to reassess if it's still aligned with where you want to go, or does it need a little bit of modification? Okay. So let's take a look at this. So, house by house, I want you to reimagine your business for innovation, that's the Aquarius side, and for ease and flow. This is the Pisces side, right? When we can bring more ease and flow into our business, it makes business so much more fun. It makes things more profitable. It makes you a better leader when we can show up more relaxed, right? So this Mercury retrograde is all about relaxing, releasing, and realizing. Okay, so in my Facebook group, the Savvy Luminary, I posed the question earlier today on February 12th if anybody has questions about how to use this Mercury retrograde energy. And so I had a bunch of questions that came up. I'm just going to read them, and then we're going to go into each of the houses, house by house, where to look at in your chart how you're going to be using these energies specifically for you. So Karen Marzik asks, how can I work with the energy of this Mercury retrograde time to improve my brand messaging? I thought that was an amazing question for Karen. And of course, when I looked at Karen's chart, the Mercury retrograde was transiting her first house. And so for your first house, if Mercury retrograde is going to be transiting your first house this time around, your keyword is reaffirm, right? I want you to reaffirm your brand identity and how your business is being seen, right? This is like your bigger brand, not just your logo, not just your visuals, but really a brand strategy, getting to the heart and soul of the identity and how your brand is being experienced by the people that you serve, right? So for Karen here, she was talking about her brand messaging, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than that and having her reassess her brand strategy. Okay, so if you have your Mercury retrograde transiting your first house, your keyword is reaffirm. If your Mercury is transiting your second house, your keyword is reevaluate, right? So you're going to be reevaluating your self-worth as well as the value you provide in your business, right? To be able to speak your value and to show your value, right? Then you're not just charging for your time anymore. So this is a time for you to look at your pricing and the way you talk about your offers, as well as kind of uncovering any money stories that may be holding you back, right? If you have your Mercury retrograde transiting your third house, your keyword is reiterate. This is to reiterate your communications, all of your marketing messaging, your sales and promotional materials. This is the time for you to get really clear on your words and the story you use in your brand. If you have Mercury retrograding your fourth house, your keyword is reroute. right? The fourth house in traditional astrology is about your family, it's about your lineage. But in business astrology, I like to look at this as your sanctuary, right? Maybe your home office, or maybe you run a family business, right? This is the time to look at your family life. Is it still serving you in your business? Is your family giving you the freedom that you need to work in your business, or vice versa? Right? What about your home office? Is it really serving as a sanctuary? Or maybe you're holding on to some family stories that are getting in the way of your success, right? So if you have Mercury transit in your fourth house, your keyword is reroute. If you have Mercury transit in your fifth house, your keyword is reignite. This is your ability to shine bright and be seen in your creativity, your inspiration, and your confidence, right? This is time to look at how you are integrating joy and play and showing up in your business like the luminary you are, right? This is about fun. We all need to have fun in our business. So looking at those things, how can you reignite? If Mercury is transiting your sixth house during this retrograde, your keyword is refresh. I want you to refresh your daily habits and your business systems and your overall self-care and wellness. This is a time to get efficient and feel great, because you're only going to work as well as you feel. So time to reassess and see what needs reprioritizing so you can refresh. Before we get into the seventh house, I wanted to read you another question that somebody in my group had. Susie Rosenstein, she asked, what insight can I get while I'm ramping up for another launch for my new membership? So Susie has a membership for women in midlife. And when I looked at her chart to answer that question, Susie's Mercury retrograde was happening in her seventh house. And the seventh house, if you have Mercury retrograding in the seventh house, it's time for you to recommit. Recommit your closest relationships, your vendors, your partners, your contractors, and your ideal customers, right? It's time to see if your partnerships are still working for you. And if they're not, exactly how do you want them to look like? Right? This is also related a little bit to the eighth house, and Susie's Mercury retrograde was going to be transiting both her seventh house of her partnerships, the people that she's supposed to commit to. So we know that Susie has a very specific ideal customer as midlife women, but really honing down into exactly what they are looking for and being able to speak to that. And so it's for Susie, it's also going into the eighth house. And so what I recommended for Susie, if you have a Mercury retrograde transiting your eighth house, it's time to reassess. Reassess your contracts, reassess any kind of debts or insurance or loans or taxes, that those kind of other people's money, like where your money and other people's money kind of interact. That is where you need to review if Mercury is transiting your eighth house, right? So making sure that all of these bonds between you and them are in your favor, right? Not at the expense of somebody else, but making sure you're being protected. And it's a time to look at maybe refinancing so you can protect your bottom line. In Susie's instance, what I recommended for her as she is getting ready for her launch is to make sure that all of the agreements and her membership inclusions and all of that streamlined process for getting people into her membership are really slick and well-defined and clear. That's going to be a really great asset for Susie to look into for this Mercury retrograde. If Mercury is retrograding your ninth house, it's time to renew your purpose and impact for your business. This is about your belief system, right? It's time for you to review your big picture, your big dreams, and your big vision, right? Is your big vision serving you in your business? Or do you need to redefine what that vision is so that you and your brand can be seen as the visionary? And then 10th house. If Mercury is transiting your 10th house, this is a place for you to redefine. Redefine the way that you are delivering your offerings for maximum visibility. The 10th house is at the brightest spot where we're being seen, right? So when Mercury is retrograding your 10th house, it is the time for you to amp up your brand's reputation and be visible. Get yourself out there to wider audiences so you can be seen as the expert in your field. There was a woman in the Savvy Luminary who asked this. Tasha Harrison Springs had asked, how can I use this energy to bring in more money? I'm working on manifesting money and making connections. And for Tasha, her Mercury retrograde was transiting both her 10th house and her 9th house. So for her, her challenge was going to be reprioritizing how she was showing up and really getting herself as visible. I had recommended for her to clear away things that were holding her back from being visible and showing up in every place possible, as well as getting really clear on what her offering was and being direct with offering her service to others for money. Right? Sometimes we think that, oh, well, it's on my website, all of the services I have to offer. But when we meet people, we just expect them to know that. No, we have to be direct. Hire me for this, right? I do this. I am an expert at this, right? That's all 10th house stuff with showing up and being visible. So if your Mercury is retrograding or transiting retrograde in your 11th house, your keyword is to rebuild. And this is rebuilding your communities, rebuilding your platforms, rebuilding your causes. It's time to get really clear about the new ways you want to build your community. Right? 11th house is about your friends and your hopes and your dreams. So this is about enlisting your friends, enlisting your associates and allies, and calling them in to build your platform, right? And so clearing the way, what has changed so that you can now build anew. Okay, last one, 12th house. This is the one we've been waiting for. If Mercury is transiting your 12th house during this retrograde cycle, your keyword is to restore. To restore yourself, to restore your heart and your soul. This honestly is a time to retreat, and retreating as an act of productivity. It's just a few weeks, relaxing. It's not that you're going to give up on all work, but it's really time to prioritize relaxing, working and playing and relaxing all in equal importance. Pay special attention to spirit as well, because spirit will probably want to be showing up in your business. And so reprioritizing your business to make time for spirit in your business. I'd love to see you do that. Okay, so I just went through all of those 12 houses. Again, there's a cheat sheet in the Savvy Luminary in the show notes, so you can refer back to that long list. Okay, so last thing for this Mercury retrograde episode. This is how I'd like you to plan and use this time in your business. Earlier in the schedule, I was talking about the the combust, the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde, which happens on February 25th. So from February 16th through February 25th, the first half of this Mercury retrograde, this is a time to complete unfinished business, right? This is a time for you to clear the slate, to look at the specific house that needs attention so that you'll have insight as to where you might have overextended yourself right now, right? So this is the time to edit your life, right? I was speaking about Marie Kondo earlier, the Japanese organizer. She has a special on Netflix, and I love the way that she makes space and clears the clutter, right? She wants you to look at everything and ask it if it sparks joy. Does it really bring you joy? Do you use it? Does it bring you joy? Do you love it? And if it doesn't, time to thank it. Thank it for being in your life and discard. Trust that you do not need it anymore. So The first half of this Mercury retrograde, it's time to edit your life and channel in your inner Marie Kondo. Okay. So after the first half, after February 25th, for the second half of this Mercury retrograde, this is the time to plan for your future action. If you've done the work in the first half, you're going to have gotten really clear on how to realign, what needs readjustment, what needs reprioritizing. And so in the second half, make a plan of action of the things that you're going to do in that area of your life, in that area of your business, so that you can move forward. Now, don't move forward just yet, right? Wait until Mercury goes direct again. It goes forward and direct again on March 9th. So that's all I have today for Mercury retrograde. I know it was a long episode, but it was packed full of information. I didn't want you to miss a thing. Go to the Savvy Luminary to look for the show notes in case you need to refer back. And of course, feel free to hop into the free group on Facebook, the Savvy Luminary, to ask me your astrology questions for your business and just to join the community. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to the Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses. Next week, we'll be talking about the upcoming new moon in Pisces and how to use the energy to plant your seeds of intention in your business. Until then, bye.